Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board.
Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing.
Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacy Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I am beyond excited today. I was having a fangirl moment with our guest expert that agreed to come on. So we have Beth Cantor, and I'm sure you have heard her name. Welcome, Beth, by the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy, for inviting me to join you on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So a little bit of background on Beth, although I'm sure her reputation and stellar work speaks for itself. Beth is an internationally recognized thought leader and trainer in digital transformation and well-being in the nonprofit workplace. She is the co-author of the award-winning Happy, Healthy Nonprofit, Impact Without Burnout, and co-author with Allison Fine of The Smart Nonprofit. Named one of the most influential women in technology by Fast Company and recipient of the N10 Lifetime Achievement Award, she has over 3 decades of experience in designing and delivering training programs for nonprofits and foundations. As a sought-after keynote speaker and workshop leader, she has presented at nonprofit conferences around the world to thousands of nonprofits. You can learn more about Beth at www.bethcantor.org. That's BETHKANTER.org. We will be putting that link as well as the links to any resources and of course, the books that Beth has written in the show notes. So with that said, welcome. And is there anything we missed in the bio, Beth, that you want to share for with our listeners?
Oh, you did a great job of covering my background. Thank you.
She's very modest, folks. So we are going to dive right into the question. Artificial intelligence is clearly the hot topic these days. Do you have any recommendations on how we should go about deciding whether to use AI in our organization? And if we do, how to get started and what types of projects make the most sense to use AI? Beth, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. What a great question. So let me break it down. All right. So the first is like should we use it or not? Or maybe can we avoid using it or can we just ignore it? And I would say the simple answer to that is no, because despite the amount of hype that we've been seeing over the last couple of months, this is really what's known as a disruptive technology. I know that's scary words, but basically it is similar to the introduction of the mobile phone, of the internet, social media, and the personal computer in the workplace. It's really going to dramatically change the way we do our work. So it's something that we do need to pay attention to, especially leaders. This is not just a technical tool that you're going to grab off the shelf and use. It's way more powerful than previous generations of unquote, disruptive technology. So what's different about this? So the thing that's different about it is the one thing is that it's had a really fast adoption curve compared to other types of technologies. Now, in the one metric that Silicon Valley, I'm right sitting here in the middle of Silicon Valley, likes to use is 1 million active users. Now, TikTok, which is a very popular app, took at least a couple of months, if not 6 months, to get to 1 million active users. And ChatGPT has done that in less than a month, right? So
wow.
It's going to have widespread adoption. And the thing that's different from this, from other generations of new technologies, is that it's actually making decisions for us. So the way it works is that it uses data large data sets, and Allison and I like to say Library of Congress-sized data sets.
Oh, wow.
And it can do an analysis way faster than we can do it, and then come up with a task or a decision based on what we've asked it to do. So let's take ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a language model, and what it's trained to do is to recognize patterns in words, and then generate text or new images or new videos based on that. And it mimics human intelligence. It's not as smart as us yet, nor does it have human empathy or other qualities of humans, but it's a step more advanced than previous generations of artificial intelligence in that it can do more coordination and writing tasks as opposed to just grunt work, filling out forms and whatnot. So that's the thing that is at the same time both exciting and also scary, because on one hand, we're hearing a lot, it's going to kill our jobs. Not all jobs can be automated, nor should they. Nonprofit leaders really shouldn't look at this technology as a cheap replacement for staff. Okay, so we really, in the nonprofit sector, leaders should be thinking about this technology to use to augment their human staff, right? It's to think of it more as an opportunity to hire on a bunch of virtual assistants or have a whole army of interns there ready to help you with various tasks. So it can free up staff time to really do the work that they came in the sector to do.
I really appreciate you just addressing that right out of the gate, right? Because I do think it's a fear, and we hear people, they're worried about the change. They're worried about what the future of the workforce looks like. I'm curious to know, I've heard other people who are studying AI and are much smarter than I am on it talk about the idea of there may be actually positions that are hired that are AI specific about how to work with AI in your organization or how to communicate with ChatGPT as an example. So there could actually even be, while you're saving time with some of those more rote tasks, that you might need someone who really understands how to leverage, something like a ChatGPT. Have you heard of things like this?
I've heard the role described as kind of like a lion tamer.
Yes.
You want someone to tame the lion so it doesn't just eat the general public, if you will.
Yeah.
But the thing that's different, it's not like we're going to just hire a ChatGPT or an artificial intelligence expert and they're going to go in the corner and do their job. Because really, this can be integrated in all jobs. And what leaders should be thinking about really is what is the reskilling that we need to do for our staff? And what does this free us up to be able to do? In our book, we call this the dividend of time, because we don't want people to use it and just to not change the way they're working and just continue to just do more and more and more, but faster, right?
No.
What this is giving us is this unique gift of the gift of time, right? So we can make time for these really human-centered types of tasks that are in our job, like cultivating donors, building relationships, caring for the people that our organizations serves, right? And just the workplace and internally being able to take a breath or maybe switch to a 4-day work week, right? Or to have that time to plan and to be innovative and creative and to be, more human.
Imagine that, right? That really ties into some of the other work you've done with the Happy Healthy Nonprofit about, burnout shouldn't be something we're bragging about, right? And how do we integrate more, care and well-being into our lives? And this may be one tool potentially from what you're saying to do just that.
Yes, if we have the courage, right, to really look at the way we're working and the way we're leading and make some changes, because it's not going to happen otherwise. The tool isn't going to do that for us, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing we need to be really careful of is that we need to really lead with our values and make a pledge to do no harm, because these tools, if we're not careful and we don't really understand how they're used and we're just sending it over to hire an AI expert and just let them deal with it, or send it down the hall to the IT people. Leaders have to really understand that these tools are trained on data, and data is often biased. And we could inadvertently be doing something called algorithmic discrimination. We could be shutting Black and brown people of color out from our services if we're not careful enough, right? Or having it get in the way of building relationships with people. So, or most recently, maybe you heard about it, maybe some of your readers have heard about it, was the National Eating Disorder Association, NEDA, I think it's called. Well, they recently looked at, it was Allison and myself's worst possible scenario that we could imagine when we were writing the book, that an organization would come along and that they would think of it as a cheap replacement for staff. So what happened is, during the pandemic, there was just a huge surge of requests for their hotline, because I guess with isolation is sort of the perfect storm for someone to be consumed with a eating disorder. And so they've had this wonderful hotline where people could call or text or get advice. And they had 4 staff members, they had 200 volunteers, and they were overwhelmed because of the amount of requests. And they went to management and they said, please hire more staff. We're overwhelmed. We can't serve all of the need here. And please do this or we'll unionize, right? So what senior leadership did was create a bot, gave pink slips to the employees, put the bot to answer people's questions about eating disorders. Often people may be coming in crisis, and the bot wasn't properly tested, and it was dispensing harmful information. So they had to take it down, and it was a bit of a public relations crisis for them. And so that's what we want nonprofits to do, not to rush into this as it's going to solve all our problems, but you have to walk into it very intentionally and slowly, and be thoughtful about it.
So can you use that as an example of, it's a great case study of, if that were done right, an organization such as that one wants to use this in a way to increase productivity and efficiency, move toward more of those human-centered design and all of those emotional intelligence skills that are so desperately needed in the sector. So can you talk about how this would look if this organization maybe had taken it more slowly, or what would be the steps to ensure that doesn't happen to your organization?
So what we write about in the book, and there's some great examples in the book, is that leaders really need to be knowledgeable, reflective, and above all, human-centered. So there was another organization that we wrote about, also dealing with mental health services, the Trevor Project. You may be familiar with them. They have a crisis counseling line for LGBTQ youth. And they too were overwhelmed during the pandemic. And when they turned to AI, they took the time to figure out what's the problem, all right, and what's the right way to solve it with this tool. Well, the problem is that they didn't have enough capacity to address all of the callers, but they also knew that putting this technology, because there's been examples of chatbots being harmed, working in a harmful way to people. They didn't want to put it on the front line with this particular population. Because their counselors were trained to answer questions in a particular way and to be very human-centered. So what they did was, part of our problem is that our staff are so overwhelmed that they don't have enough time to train enough volunteers who can then help, with the counseling on the front line, right? So they decided to design a bot that would be used for training simulations. So that freed up staff time from delivering training to really more on quality control, at the same time increasing the number of trained counselors that were on the front line, and thus addressing this particular problem of not having the capacity to fulfill all the demands for services.
Interesting. So if I'm understanding you, was this actually sort of so this wasn't a direct, the bot wasn't directly tied to the client. It was more a capacity building tool for the staff. Am I understanding that correctly?
And it was only used in very controlled circumstances. It wasn't just unleashed on to the public or to end users because they did their homework. And there have been famous instances of this happening with chatbots that use something similar to Chat GPT underneath, because its ability to learn from interaction. So there's one tech company, this was in 2017, created a bot for Twitter called Tay. And the intent of the bot was to learn to, how to speak to young people by interacting with them on Twitter. Well, the trolls got a hold of it within a few hours and turned it into a racist a-hole. And it caused a problem, and they took it down. And there have been a number of instances of this happening. And it's still, the jury's still out on whether or not they should be put on the front line and used for mental health services.
Okay.
There are companies that are experimenting with this, but it hasn't yet gone through, it hasn't had scientific approval, it needs, for something like that, it needs very careful study.
Well, and I'm just thinking about, I was actually speaking to a nonprofit leader who recently was talking a bit about their own interest in adopting this as an augmentation of staff in some of the programs they serve for victims of violence. And, those victims call the hotline or get in touch with the organization in a number of different ways. And I think they were grappling with the idea of, are there some basic entry type, almost like if you call a helpline or a help desk, you have sort of the, that online person that we know isn't a person, right? The online bot that answers some very basic things to get us fielded to the right situation. And I'm listening to you going, it still feels a little precarious. You're dealing with someone who is in crisis. I mean, maybe that's my skeptic, right? But is there another way to test this out without testing it out on someone's life that is in a moment of crisis?
And that's why we need to have nonprofits take a do no pledge harm. But to answer your question, Crisis Text Line actually does use this technology. And
Okay.
again, it's but the way they're using it is that this technology is really powerful when it can go through large data sets, right? And it can analyze different patterns. And so what they did is that they fed it, stripping all the privacy information, past, hundreds and thousands of chat conversations. And it was able to analyze like words or phrases that somebody typically uses if they're in danger of taking their own life. Or if they're in danger of harm. And what it would do is then escalate that caller to a human or in the queue. I mean, they don't put bots on the front line, but they're using it to analyze in real time the text conversation. And if there are some like trigger words that may indicate that this person is in greater danger of doing harm to themselves, then that person is then escalated to get and routed quicker to get help.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's doing the kind of thing you're talking about, but they and they have a huge data set. It's been well tested, and before they've used it on the front lines.
Okay. That's what I hear you saying, right? That's slow and controlled and intentional and thoughtful and values-based use of all of this.
Absolutely. And not only the organizations, but their choice of tech partners too. I mean, we're so used in this sector just to run and implement, right? Yes. We don't have much time. Let's just, get this done. Give me the shortcut, right? Now, I think with this technology, not only do we need to examine what it means to be human, but we also, it's going to be a different set of skills. We have to test things. We have to use human-centered design. We have to get really good at problem formation, right? We're more interested in problem solution and give me the tips, give me the quick answer. But what's going to happen, and especially with tools like Chat GPT that are going to be able to generate content for us, for example, it's not really good at framing. something, because that's really a human skill, or at articulating what the problem is. So that's the thing that we need to focus on as humans, right?
Very good point. Yes, and that is a different level of critical thinking than perhaps some of our jobs are currently even designed for. But providing some of that deeper level thinking and analysis that perhaps isn't available.
Right, and that's when I talk about reskilling staff to be trained to do that better.
Okay. So when I think about the question about, right, so how should we go about deciding whether to use this? It sounds like, tell me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you said there is really like, you're going to be left behind if you don't figure out how to use this. Is that a fair assessment to say?
You're going to be left behind if you don't use this thoughtfully. So along with figuring out the right use case, mapping out what does the machine do, what should the human do. The humans are always in charge. Picking the right technical partners or vendors. Now that's going to be less, for projects like we've been talking about, putting a bot to be, to help with like hotline services. That you would need a technical partner, but also Chat GPT is going to be integrated into many different products that we're already using, like Microsoft Office and all the search engines, right? So we still need to have guidance to reap the benefits, because what's happening now, maybe not so much in the nonprofit sector, but a lot of people in the workplaces are adopting Chat GPT, for example, but it's concealed, because they're afraid to tell their boss, because they're afraid they might lose their job, or their coworker might lose their job, or they might be judged, or in some cases it might be banned, right? And the organization is not going to have the impact unless the whole organization is using it, right? Not just one person here and there, right? And so you need to have a process with a tool like ChatGPT, not only be trained in stuff, what's called prompt engineering, which is how to ask it questions, because that's the way it works, but also sharing that, what's our playbook? What, did you learn to get good responses from this technology? And also there's a responsible use element, as with any kind of implementation. Chat GPT is known to hallucinate. It's been trained on the internet, right? So that's a scary thought right there. The data that it's been trained on, at least in these public models, is information that it's read or that's been fed to it through the internet. And there's a lot of great information on the internet, but there's a lot of crap too, and things that are incorrect. And so, and because it can generate something and can state it in a very convincing way, you think it's true, but it may not be true. So you have to fact check it. Right. The other thing too, if you're using a public model versus building your own with using something called an API, if you're using a public model, you can't like cut and paste confidential information into it. So people need some responsible use guidelines. They need training, and there needs to be kind of an organizational knowledge building piece of it too. And then once it's been metabolized into people's jobs, then to think about like, how do we invest this dividend of time that will gain from this?
It seems like an opportunity to be very strategic. Within the organization. I think one of the things that is striking me is this isn't, as so many people do, right? It's the sexy thing, even though we know this has been around for years, but it's this sexy thing right now that everyone is jumping into. And like anything, there are no quick fixes. There are no quick solutions. So do you have recommendations for someone who's just getting started, or even someone who's along the journey who says, okay, we need to have some of these guidelines in place. We need to have a list of preferred tech providers, or what are the questions we ask tech providers? Are there resources or organizations out there that our listeners can go research after today? Of course, after they read your book, that's the first thing.
I was going to say, we have a whole book on this. So I would go there. The second place I would go is the Nonprofit Technology Network, or N10. There's thousands of nonprofit techies, and a lot of them are also focused on this. And N10 also has great resources. If they work in international development, there's NetHope, which has a lot of really great resources. And I mean, there's lots of articles out there. If you want to get to the really tactical piece of it, like prompt engineering, there's a wonderful organization called AIexchange.org. Has been it's more technical, but really lots of useful information. And I would be reading, especially if I was a leader, I would be reading articles in the Harvard Business Review and at the MIT Management Journal that are coming out and talking about this from a managerial leadership perspective. And what all of this means for your strategy. I'd like to call it AI literacy.
Yes.
Generative AI, up your AI literacy. I'm not asking CEOs and nonprofit executive directors to roll up their sleeves and learn how to code, but you do need to understand what this technology can do and what it can't do, and how it can potentially impact your strategy.
And how are organizations dealing? You've mentioned this already, but the idea of bad data in is bad data out, right? And so this concept of, if there is data coming in that is biased data, that obviously didn't have all of the voices and lived experiences in giving you some of the information, that's what exists out there. So how do you, other than the systemic issue that we're all working on in equity and working to ensure all voices are heard and included, what do you do in using AI with something like that? Or what are you seeing people do?
Okay, so you really need to, in this sort of readiness, not only define the problem that you want to solve, the right problem, but you also don't just sit in your conference room with you and your staff or yourself and just think about that. Go out and talk to the end users and the potential people who might be left out. In our book, there's an opening story about, and this is a couple of years ago, a homeless agency that automated its risk assessment using these technologies. And what it ended up doing, in the way that the questions were phrased, it ended up closing out Black and brown people. What happened was social workers started noticing that there were less people of color qualifying for services, and kind of traced it back to this tool. It caused quite a flap in the local area. And that's because they really didn't involve any of the social workers in the design and development of the tool, because so I think there were questions, for example, like, have you ever been arrested? And a lot of people of color won't answer that, or because they're afraid, right?
Okay.
And the social workers knew that. So, and so if they say no, it gives them a lower risk score, which closes them out of the services. So it's very easy to fall into a trap of bias.
Yes.
To prevent that, you really need to have potential end users and people who are knowledgeable about the programmatic aspect of it involved in the design and testing. And you really have to start small with a proof of concept, test it, pilots, before you're going to full-scale implementation.
Okay. And so I think that when we think about projects for an organization just getting started, obviously there's a huge learning curve and a lot of thought and learning that is really a first step. Figuring out kind of your own values around this and how your values of your organization apply to this work. Thinking about, as you said, kind of your use case and opportunities to use this, but also I'm wondering if I also hear from what you're saying, perhaps maybe a safer way to get started is to start internally. Maybe it's a less visible, maybe it's testing it out on a smaller scale, like you said, a pilot that's maybe more internal to your organization in some way that won't impact externally. I don't know. Does that make any sense, what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah. But let's also look at like ChatGPT. There are definite proven benefits to it, productivity benefits, right? So there, it's more taking instead of letting staff just go do it on their own, like talk to people about let's try a pilot in the development office. Let's see how, it's really great writing tool, right?
Yes.
Okay. And editing tool. You need to be aware of certain things, like I already mentioned, like the hallucinations. You need to understand how to fact check it. And you need certain skills around crafting the right questions for it, so it'll generate the right content, and being able to look at what it generates and figure out how to improve upon it. So maybe saying, okay, we're going to try this for some of our development office writing, maybe grant reports or whatever. And we're just going to see what we've learned about prompts. We're going to learn about what the output is from it. And we're going to understand what those limitations are. And we're going to create kind of a department playbook around it. And we're going to train people to use it. And we're going to talk about it. We'll maybe do a couple of lunch and learns around it so that we can really organizationally kind of benefit from it.
That's perfect. Great advice, and a good place for folks who are starting. I would wonder, as we look to crystallize this in the minds of our listeners, can you briefly, before we come to a wrap, because how time flies when you're having fun with these conversations, but share maybe a few examples. You've shared already case studies and Trevor Project and some of these, but from sort of a lens of inside a nonprofit, right? And I'm just going to think for the time being of a few different buckets of sort of organizational structures. So you've got maybe a development department, if you're lucky to have an actual department of more than one, right? You've got a marketing department or communications piece. You have a program piece. And then, of course, you've got finance and administration. Do you have even just a couple examples, maybe of ones we haven't talked about, of how people are creatively using this for perhaps their work in fundraising, for their work? You just mentioned sort of grant reporting or things like that, but in other parts of the organization, even beyond programs, but other parts that they're using this effectively.
Sure. I can take Chat GPT because it's here. I'm hearing a lot from fundraisers. It's an incredibly useful and powerful writing aid tool. It's some of us don't like to start with a blank page. You know how it's really hard to get started because you don't know what you don't know, and you put that first sentence down and you judge it, and then you totally tie yourself up in knots. So if you think about it, it could be a brainstorming tool, right? You can ask it to a couple of questions about generating, or feed in your kind of format for giving a thank you note to somebody and have it generate something back. Some of us have no trouble writing that first crappy draft of something, but maybe our editing isn't so great. Maybe we aren't saying it in a way that's really concise, and we can ask the tool to feed it some copy and say, can you revise this and reduce the word count, or can you rephrase this in a way that's more concise? Or maybe we are super overwhelmed with the amount of stuff we have to read and intake every day. ChatGPT is really good at summarizing. Like, for example, I just used it to help me with, I had survey responses, literally thousands of them, and they were all open-ended questions. So I asked it to, what that's like to analyze. So I asked it, what are the key themes that list in bullet points, the key themes that you're seeing. I double checked it. There were some things that it summarized. I didn't quite like the way it summarized, and I wouldn't have done it that way, but it gave me a way to start, because my initial reaction was, I don't want to do this, so overwhelming,
Yes.
I found it really helpful. I had to fill out similar to a grant application. There were a lot of narratives, but there were strict word limits. Okay. And of course, my answers were over the word limits. And I wrote my answer out. I fed it to the tool, and I asked it to revise it down to this amount of words. And it gave me back, and I kind of stripped out all the flavor that I had put in my writing. And so but I saw a couple of sentences that said, gee, I hadn't thought about saying it in that way, and that's more concise. So I borrowed that Another way it's helped me is I recently did a workshop for an organization that's a capacity builder that's doing language justice. So it was bilingual. And we had live interpretation of both Spanish and English on my Leading with Empathy workshop. And what I had to do for the interpreters, just so they were prepared, was to give a script of what I was going to say. And they advised me to, when you speak, to speak in simple English. It'll make it easier to translate.
Yes.
So I asked ChatGPT to, I gave it my bullet points in my script, and I asked it to reduce it to sixth grade reading level and to make it simple and don't use any jargon or idiomatic phrases.
Oh, wow.
I only learned that because I asked for it to say this in a simple English at a sixth grade level in a conversational way. And then it fed me back some things, and it was using and it's a Kodak moment to say, oh, well, I would never say that. And also that wouldn't translate. So then I refined my prompt to ask to give it back to me and don't use any jargon or idiomatic phrases.
Okay. My goodness.
It saved me a lot of time, because it would have taken me hours to do that if I went through my whole presentation to do that. I don't think I'd used all of it verbatim, because some of it I didn't like, but so what I'm saying with it is that there's this learning piece that you have to learn how to learn with it, and that you can't just do cut and paste,
Yes.
But any writing task that we need to do, and a lot of us need to do writing, right, in our jobs, It can help you and save you a lot of time.
Well, we had my co-host of this podcast, Andy, and I, we recently decided we were going to play with this for one of the descriptions we did to tease out an upcoming podcast. And we said, well, let's use ChatGPT and tell them. And we laughed. I mean, we had some giggles over it, right? I mean, it was fun. We said, oh, make that less serious and more fun or more conversational. It didn't sound exactly like us, but we used it as an example just to play with people and say, play around a little, because it was harmless, and say, look, this is what it came up with. And it was kind of fun, But you
can actually give it some examples of your writing and ask for it to generate it with this style.
That's great.
You just have to be very specific with the prompts.
Yeah.
You can't just say, write this, but you want to say, write a 600-word essay that makes the case for.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also been useful. I do a lot of coaching with folks and about workplace well-being, and often people end up deciding that it's too toxic and I need to find another job. So somebody we were working through how do I prepare for my job interview? And I said, well, you can use ChatGPT, feed it the job description, and ask it to play the role of interviewer. Play the role of an interviewer. I'm applying for this job. Here's the job description. Ask me questions.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay. I love those creative uses. One thing that I've actually started experimenting with myself, or having clients experiment with, I do a lot of work with nonprofit boards. And for those listening, you'll all appreciate how oftentimes the idea of minute taking gets sent to staff to do instead of actually the board secretary. And it seems like obviously this is a legal document and we need to take it seriously and make sure things are accurately reflected. But when done the right way, it feels like even a tool that could be used in the boardroom or any room for note-taking, recording minutes.
There are some tools. In fact, I don't know if it's here with us now. You'll notice Beth's Autopilot is here.
Yes.
That is a voice to text tool. And basically it's taking verbatim transcript. And what it does is it stores the notes by my calendar. It just follows me to everywhere. But when I'm doing a meeting, and sometimes I don't have an assistant to take notes,
right?
This will take the verbatim notes. So I can just focus on what were the decisions made, or what are the key points. It does have an algorithm in there that will summarize key points. Some of it's silly, but I found it's really useful for me when I just don't have I don't have an assistant who can take notes for me.
Yeah, Great. So it's there's a lot of uses. I think if we get creative and of course be careful. I mean, careful and cautious and intentional is I hear that as the undergird, and I think it's a really important reminder in today's fast-paced world. Because to your point, I could also see this becoming just the opposite of, oh, great, we can pile on more work and add more things to your plate because this is going to take time away, and that is not at all what I hear you saying. And I'm really glad to hear you say that.
I just hope people will listen.
I know. Let's hope people will listen, and those listening to this podcast will. So, all right, Beth, any final thoughts before we wrap it up today?
Again, I think this is a powerful tool, software, and it can help us reinvent the next chapter of organizational life for nonprofits. But we need to approach it with creativity, with empathy, and being really human-centered.
Well, I can't thank you enough, and I know our listeners can't thank you enough for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to be with us. So thank you, Beth.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Stacey.